quiet line, and you cheat, and you try to make a fool out of she.
So, with Marvel having previously announced that they are making an Inhumans film, I figured it'd be a very good idea to do a video about the Inhumans, because I think a lot of people know of them, but I don't think very many people know about the Inhumans in depth. And so in order to really kind of bring them about to a wider range of people, I figured we would explain the Inhumans with regards to their role in relationship to the Kree, as well as their role in relationship to the planet Earth, humanity itself, along with the Fantastic Four and other heroes and villains in the Marvel Universe. So the Inhumans have a very rich and beautiful publication history in Marvel Comics, despite the fact that they are not one of the premier members of Marvel Comics. That is to say, they are not on par with the Fantastic Four or the X-Men. But despite this, despite the fact that they are not nearly as popular as others, they are included in quite a few storylines, and they are a group of individuals that Marvel Comics fans always love to see appear, just because of their unique role in Marvel Comics, the unique way in which they develop their powers, as well as the interesting societal structure that they have. So the Inhumans first appeared in Fantastic Four issue number 36, and this is actually not a full-on appearance of the Inhumans, that is to say, the group as it's being led by their king, Black Bolt. What we actually see here is that a villain named Wizard has reformed a group called the Frightful Four. And the Frightful Four was the Silver Age anti-group to the Fantastic Four. And when I say Silver Age, I simply mean to say that this was the era in the 1960s whereby a lot of characters came about, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, different groups like that. But the Frightful Four at this point consists of the Wizard himself, along with Madame Medusa, the Sandman, and Paste Pot Pete, also known as the Trapster now. We see that the Frightful Four comes into contact with the Fantastic Four, and of course, as usual with this Silver Age of comics, the Fantastic Four come out on top. But the purpose of this comic was not to really see us watch the Frightful Four come into conflict with the Fantastic Four. It was designed to introduce us to Madame Medusa. Now, in issues number 44 through 47, what we learn is that Madame Medusa is part of a group called the Inhumans, and at some point prior to issue number 36 of the Fantastic Four, Madame Medusa had suffered from amnesia. She had been in some sort of a plane crash, I think. We see that ultimately she comes into contact and is being chased by an individual named Gorgon. And the way that Gorgon is introduced to us in issue number 44 of the Fantastic Four is that he's a villain of some kind, although we don't really know why. We eventually learned that with Madame Medusa having suffered from amnesia, she had gone missing from the Inhumans, and that Gorgon had been tasked by their leader Black Bolt to find her and to bring her back. We ultimately see that the Inhumans come into conflict with the Fantastic Four, but it's really more due to a mistake of intentions rather than the Fantastic Four believing that the Inhumans were an actual threat and that it was a group they intended to destroy. Now, one important thing to take note here is that during Black Bolt's conflict and his fight with the Thing of the Fantastic Four, not only is he able to physically go toe-to-toe with the Thing, but he never talks. Now, this is a very important part of Black Bolt, and this is actually something that's explained to us in the backstories with regards to the creation of the Inhumans and the introduction of their creation, as well as the backstory of Black Bolt and Thor issues number 146 to 152. So the backstory of the Inhumans and Black Bolt is given to us in Thor issues number 146 to 149. In addition, the story of the Inhumans is expanded on even further in issues 150 to 153. In issues 146 and 147, what we see is an advanced race sharing Earth with a very primitive race. And the advanced race is constantly on the move due to the fact that the very primitive race is constantly tracking them down and trying to kill them because they do not understand the more advanced race. We eventually see that a blue-skinned alien or a robot of sorts is perusing the environment looking for a more advanced race. And when it discovers the advanced race, it immediately heads to its home in order to interact with the species. We find out over the course of issues 146 and 147 that this alien is designed to see how far this race has progressed. Even further, we learn that its creators, the Kree, were the ones responsible for creating the Inhumans. Now, we don't learn what the motivations behind the Kree were in creating the Inhumans until much later. But what we do know is that they had been created by selecting a small number of humans who at the time were very, very primitive, meaning that we were evolving from Neanderthals to Cro-Magnons. They had sped up the evolutionary process of the mental capacity of humans, but had kept humans the same physiologically, meaning that our minds were more knowledgeable, but our body chemistry and our body structure remained the same. Over time, the Kree eventually left, although we do not know why. However, the Inhumans themselves continued as a progression of their species. In addition, we also see that their leader at the time, I believe it was Radnak, although I'm not going to swear to that name, had undergone a process called Terrigenesis, whereby he had subjected himself to exposure to the Terrigen mists, which granted him superpowers. In addition, he undergoes the process of having all of his people subject themselves to the same process, and we begin to see this sort of caste form, this sort of societal structure form, as a result of individuals who have undergone this. Now, in Thor issues number 148 and 149, we're given the backstory of their leader, Black Bolt. And what we learn is that Black Bolt, as an infant, had demonstrated the ability to harness and control electrons, and to use these electrons for virtually any feat, to either create things out of thin air, or to use them as a means to project energy. In addition, we also learn why it is that Black Bolt does not talk, and the reason is because his voice really kind of resonates on a quasi-sonic level. And what we see is that as an infant, he cries. And because he cries, he creates this wildly destructive blast of energy that destroys the entire laboratory and almost levels the city. As a result, he is discovered, but he has undergone or put through the process of learning how to control his powers and to understand that he can never talk. Now, in issue number 149 of Thor, we see that he is kind of reintroduced into Inhuman society as an adult. However, his brother, Maximus the Mad, who will consistently be someone that will attempt to usurp the throne of King from Black Bolt, will try to get him to talk and therefore demonstrate that he is not prepared for the throne and for the role of King in Inhuman society. Ultimately, Maximus the Mad fails, and Black Bolt, along with his cousins, the Inhuman royal family, are able to not necessarily destroy Maximus, but at the very least thwart his schemes, and to allow Black Bolt to eventually, once his parents are dead, undertake the role of King of the Inhumans. So following their appearance in Thor Volume 1, issues number 146 to 152, we see that the Inhumans appear in Amazing Adventure Volume 2, issues 1 through 10. Now, issues 1 through 8 of Amazing Adventure are split books, meaning that the first half of the book focuses on the Inhumans, and the second half focuses on Black Widow. Now, we see that by issues 9 and 10, Black Widow has been dropped, and those issues focus only on the Inhumans. And during this run of the Inhumans in Amazing Adventure, what we see is an attempt yet again by Maximus the Mad to usurp the throne of King from Black Bolt. But we also see that Black Bolt has his memories wiped, so to speak, or his mind wiped by Maximus the Mad. And as a result, he doesn't quite know who he is. And we see him, over the course of these comics, come into contact with several individuals. We see him come into contact with Thor of the Avengers. We see him come into contact with Magneto. Now, at the end of this run, he ultimately ultimately regains his former self and returns as king to Black Bolt, as king to the Inhumans. In addition, by 1975, the Inhumans are given their own solo run. Now, this runs until about 2003 over 4 volumes, but we never really see these volumes evolve into anything more than about a 12-issue run. And in fact, I think Volume 3 might actually be around 4 or 5 issues. And what we see over the course of these volumes is that in Volume 1, again, Maximus the Mad attempts to usurp the throne from Black Bolt, but we see that Maximus the Mad at the end of Volume 1 is mentally locked away. In Volume 2, which many consider to be the greatest volume of the Inhumans and perhaps one of the greatest stories ever told in Marvel Comics, is a plot that has been hatched by Black Bolt to get his people moved, get the Inhumans moved from the planet Earth to the blue side, oxygen-rich part of the moon. In Volume 3, we get a little more backstory here, and what we see is Ronan the Accuser, who is the current ruler of the Kree Empire, appearing to the Inhumans with the intention of putting them back in their role with regards to the Kree. And what we learn here is that when the Kree initially created the Inhumans, they had done this for the purpose of having the Inhumans operate as spies, more or less, or possibly operatives and part of their own army. The way that this would work is when the Kree first created the Inhumans, they gave them dormant genes. And these dormant genes were identical to the genes of other races that the Kree was looking to conquer. Because before a member of the Inhumans undergoes exposure to the Terrigen Mists, for the most part, they all look human, but once they come out, they change drastically. And Ronan the Accuser reveals that the purpose of this was that the Kree were going to expose various members of the Inhumans to the Terrigen Mist, and once they undertook the particular form that they were going to take, they would in turn infiltrate that race and begin to sort of wreak havoc from within, make that race weaker, and allow the Kree to invade and take over. Now, after this, we see that the Inhumans take a step away. They are no longer kind of like a main scene in Marvel Comics, and instead what we see are the Inhumans appearing in major story arcs and in major storylines. But despite the fact that they are appearing in other comic books, not as main stars, they still play major roles, especially when we get into a discussion about the Realm of Kings and the War of Kings. So the powers of Inhumans really kind of vary. For the most part, they all have the same base abilities. I would go as far as to say that all of the Inhumans at a base level are equal to, if not stronger, than Captain America. I think that would be a good way to kind of gauge their physical prowess. They are beyond anything that an ordinary human is capable of. In addition, we know that when a member of the Inhumans undergoes the process of Terrigenesis, or being exposed to the Terrigen Mists, that more often than not, it expands their abilities. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will every single time. There have been instances where individuals have undergone Terrigenesis and they have actually been weaker than they were before. But the abilities that a person develops when they undergo Terrigenesis is not always guaranteed. We don't really know what it is that they're going to become. In addition, you have individuals like Black Bolt. And Black Bolt was really kind of an extreme case. I would go as far as to surmise that Black Bolt is almost like a mutant among his own people. The powers that he developed as a result of exposure to the Terrigen Mist are far beyond anything that any of the Inhumans have ever developed. What we see is that he is able to manipulate electrons for a multitude of different effects. When he was an infant, he was able to manipulate electrons and create things out of thin air. As an adult, he's able to manipulate electrons for concussive blasts. He's able to enhance his physical strength and durability, reaction time, speed, by using the tuning fork on his head to channel the electrons and his physical powers in such a way that they can benefit him however it is that he sees fit. But of all the abilities that Black Bolt has, his most formidable power is his voice. And this is what makes Black Bolt so iconic and so ironic in Marvel Comics. Because when you look at some of the greatest leaders of our time, their greatest attribute has been their ability to speak. And in fact, some people have been able to speak in such a way that people can't help but listen to them. They can't help but be pulled into what it is that they're saying. But with Black Bolt, it's not like this. Because Black Bolt never talks, Medusa is usually always the one who interprets for him. In addition, members of the royal family who have been around him for so long are really kind of used to the way that he expresses how he feels. And so even without him speaking, they can usually interpret what it is that he thinks accurately enough to the very least carry out his orders. Now, the effects of his voice in terms of the power and the damage that it can do has been altered over the years. It's been expanded on over the years. When he first appeared, at the minimum, at a whisper, he was able to shake boats or to create waves. If he screamed, it was equivalent to an atomic blast. However, in recent years, the power has been expanded on, and so a whisper is enough to destroy a large chunk of area, several city blocks, for example, and a scream is powerful enough to destroy a planet. So with a character like him being as powerful as he is, it's really no wonder why he is the leader of the Inhumans, in addition to being one of the more popular characters in the Marvel Universe. So I'm curious to see how the Inhumans are going to be depicted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We know for a fact that the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are not going to be Inhumans, but that does not mean that they are not going to develop abilities from the Terrigen Mist. So with the Inhumans, it's really kind of interesting to see how it's going to play out. I mean, do we know if they're going to have a major role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Are they going to have their own film and in turn be a major part of events later on down the road? Or are they going to be limited? For example, the Inhumans and Black Bolt appeared in the House of M, although it was only for a couple pages. We see that Apocalypse is a ally of Magneto and has traveled to Wakanda, I believe, to either convert Black Panther to the side of Magneto or else to destroy him. We see that Black Bolt appears as an ally of Black Panther and destroys Apocalypse by whispering. And that's really about it. He meets with a couple other people in the panels, but there's really nothing more to the Inhumans in the House of M storyline than that. However, in the follow-up to the Son of M, we see that they are a major figure in that storyline. We see that in the events of the Silent War that the Inhumans have waged war against humanity. We also see that in the War of Kings and the Realm of Kings, they play huge roles. So it's really kind of interesting to see how these characters are going to be depicted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, we do know that Marvel, of course, is toying with the idea that Marvel wants to bring the Inhumans into the fold, but we know that the Inhumans are not going to be a replacement for mutants. That is to say that even though Marvel doesn't own the rights to Mutant and doesn't own any of the X-Men, they are not going to say Cyclops is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and he developed his powers because he's an Inhuman or something like that. They're going to be totally separate, and they're going to be represented as being completely separate. So I'm curious here. I wonder if Marvel is going to introduce the Inhumans the same way they were introduced in the comics, that they are a very old race, they've been isolated from the world for so long that no one's known about them, and they suddenly just popped up due to a set of circumstances outside of their control. They were looking for someone, and by virtue of looking for that individual in the comics, Madame Medusa, they happen to be exposed to the rest of humanity. I don't really know how all this is going to play out, but what I do think is that Marvel including the Inhumans in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a great idea, because the Inhumans, I've always felt, were a very underrated group in Marvel Comics. Despite the fact that they were never wildly popular among the mainstream, they were always a great group to read about, and they were always a great group of people to really kind of follow up on, and it was always very happy for me to see individuals like the Inhumans appear in storylines. I was absolutely floored when I saw that the Inhumans had appeared in the House of M storyline, and I was anxious just as much as any other comic book fan to get my hands on the 6-issue limited series, The Son of M, after the events of the House of M came to a close. Regardless of how it is that Marvel chooses to include the Inhumans into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I do think that we're going to be able to get a very rich and a very great expansion to the storyline that goes on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in addition to seeing them play some very interesting roles. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Because the original Sinister Six was composed of course, Dr. Octopus, Kraven the Hunter, Vulture, Electro, Sandman, and Mysterio. But we really haven't seen any of these characters yet in any of the Marvel Multimedia Universe. The only real exception to that is, of course, the Fox films, and that had Dr.